Let's be real here. I've never been great at time management unless someone is telling me exactly what to do. At the end of the year, I wrote out my goals for 2020. I know, it's a crazy new decade, isn't that exciting? And realized that I need to have some kind of superhero-worthy laser focus on what I want to do this year, because you all are relying on me to make more things. I mean, last time you saw me, there were just over 1,000 of you, and as of filming this video, our small but mighty YouTube community has grown by 300 crafty people while I was on vacation. Isn't that amazing? Speaking of this incredible community, I am in love with all of the things that you've been sharing on the hashtag CraftyVintageLady, especially thanks to Donna SB715 on Instagram, who was very busy during the holidays doing her beading. Keep on being creative, whatever your medium is, crafters, and you could be featured right here on Old Fashioned AF too. Anyway, unless it wasn't apparent, I can get a little off track very quickly. In the past, I've mentioned just how difficult it is for me to stick with something to the very end, and procrastination projects tend to pop up out of nowhere for me. But it appears as though I also have a confession to make. I am apparently already better at mornings than I thought I was, and the truth has been reaffirmed by none other than lifestyle guru and writer Amy Landino, whose book Good Morning, Good Life does not disappoint. In fact, I got it for Christmas along with the Good Morning, Good Life planner, and I started reading it just last week and have scarcely put it down during my new morning reading sessions, because apparently I am now that extra that I read at least a chapter a day of something, anything, to get my mornings rolling now. We live in an incredible time when cultivating and shaping your own life is arguably more accessible and personalized than ever before. So when we talk about time management, it can be easy to forget that in most periods in history, sculpting your own life from, well, the clay of the internet, that metaphor doesn't really work, does it? Anyway, it just wasn't an option for most people to pursue their digital dreams. Like 20 years ago, it wasn't an option for most people. In fact, in the early days of the internet, there was even a mini crisis called the dot-com bubble, when investors sank too much money into internet ventures that were perhaps a little too before their time, thus proving my point splendidly. And if you're watching this video, you probably know that society still very much operates within a caste system of sorts, and in fact the gap between the rich and the poor in the United States hasn't been wider for at least 50 years. But that's not what we're talking about today. Instead, let's talk about the culture divide and what it meant for the development of the concept of time management. Time management was pretty simple for most of recorded history. The rich, gentrified, or affluent in society were allowed to think, to decide to answer the questions that plague humanity, and to create a schedule that may or may not have been regimented. These were all luxuries enjoyed by a limited few. And while it is very tempting to want to believe that we all emerged from some sort of royalty, let's be real, you probably weren't. In fact, if you were indentured, a tenant of any kind, a woman, a slave, then you could forget about the benefit of any kind of choice in your existence. So basically, if you had any metaphysical questions about your own lot in life, it was up to you alone to rise above your stature so that you could ask or act upon them. The problem was that those boundaries were so well defined that it may have been quite impossible to do for most people. But what does this have to do with setting goals and making morning plans, you ask? Well, simply put, whomever you lived under, worked for, or were governed by decided your schedule for you most of recorded history. They made goals for their estates or their companies, and you were probably only put on Earth to help achieve those goals. Were you an indentured servant, or a servant of any kind prior to the 19th century? Then your head of household decided your schedule down to the minute so that they could have a party or host a head of state. Did you work for a business owner in a factory once the Industrial Revolution began? Then your hours were decided by your employer, and they were probably long and tedious. And if you were lucky, you got the Sabbath off, but it wasn't necessarily required for a good 100 or 200 years after the Industrial Revolution began, depending on where you lived. So your days would have been spent wherever you worked, except maybe during meal times or so that you could sleep. And probably from a very young age. It was only with the advent of set working hours ordained and upheld by law that people started to have this concept called free time. With free time came an abundance of questions, and not just from the metaphysical poets anymore either. What should I do with my free time was probably a big one. And to answer the question, it was probably survival stuff like growing and making food, sleeping, keeping warm, those kinds of things. But as time went on and became more and more available to more and more working folks, people like you and me began to realize that we didn't necessarily have to work for the man all the time. And when we had free time, it wasn't necessarily always for reasons of survival, like making meals or sleeping, even if sleeping is oh so wonderful, don't get me wrong. Humanity began to visualize a future for itself that included that word that has eluded philosophers for millennia: purpose. No longer did those in power decide our purpose for every waking hour, but now, well, TV, or in recent years YouTube, could fill that void instead. And the benefit of the ability to choose your purpose can be both a blessing and a curse. In fact, knowing that you are in complete control of time and as a result, your future can be just a little overwhelming, is knowing that you are the sole person in charge of finding your own purpose just a little too much for you as well? Let me know in the comments below, and maybe we can form a Facebook group. But if you believe that I am somehow immune to this phenomenon because I thrive on vintage clothing and enjoy making things the old-fashioned way, then you would be incorrect. In fact, one of my favorite YouTubers is Amy Landino, a Midwesterner like myself. Her can-do spirit and tell-it-like-it-is attitude calls to me, and her book on making videos is pretty fab too. So, when I got her new book and her coordinating planner for Christmas, it just felt like fate. I just had to read it cover to cover in the space of a week and then let you all know how I feel and whether it's worthy of your time. Before I do that though, I suppose you're probably going to want to know what my own current goals are and how they fit into all of this philosophizing. So you can read more about my process for choosing the following goals on my website, Old Fashioned AF, and it's linked below. But before you read through that later, let me share my goals with you now. First, I'm going to start monitoring my sugar so that I eat no more than the recommended amount set by the American Heart Association on a daily basis, because health. Secondly, I'd really like to release at least one YouTube video per week from now on, which is great news for you guys, right? Third, in order to make creating things like YouTube videos and handmade clothing a little bit easier, I've made my own personal mission to move to a bigger space later this year, and it will happen this time, I promise. So be waiting for that reveal, I guess. Fourth, I'd like to make at least 3 strong, lasting connections at Costume College this year, preferably of the costume variety. And of course, there's gonna be more on this next week during our weekly live stream. And speaking of the triumphant return of our stream earlier this week, my super amazing surprise giveaway is still very much a thing, and you can be entered to win by subscribing to my email list. Simply go to oldfashionedaf.com and click on the box in the top right-hand corner. You officially have until Tuesday, January 14th at noon to do this, and I will be announcing the winner during our weekly sew stream next Wednesday. Of course, you're going to want to bring something to sip on and a crafty project, or maybe even just you and your craftiest friends. In fact, our weekly sew streams take place most Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Central Time right here on the channel, so make sure that you subscribe and click the bell under the video for notifications, and we'll see you there. Finally, my 5th goal, and the real reason for making this video, is that I'd like to practice a great morning routine most days from now on. And Amy Landino just happens to have written the manual on that very thing. Why am I calling it a manual? Because Amy insists that your mornings won't look like mine, and mine won't look like hers, etc., etc. The book outlines the best way to do mornings, but it doesn't prescribe how you should do your mornings like Amy Landino does her own mornings. Instead, she lays out how to craft the perfect morning routine for yourself by helping you choose the reason that you want a morning routine in the first place, plus navigating through the 3 M's: movement, mindfulness, and mastery. And they'll help you focus yourself first thing in the morning. What am I mastering in the morning? Anything that I learn each chapter I read every day now during my reading time. So thank you, Amy. She claims that you can do all of this within a period of about 20 minutes if you want, and still have a strong and meaningful morning every single day. And while I can't vouch for that specific claim, I will admit that when I was a teacher working in a school, my night owl self had no choice but to embrace a new dedication to mornings. On those days when I merely rolled out of bed, it was pretty obvious that I was grading their papers too late the night before or something. Let's be real, I was actually setting Sims on fire. Anyway, it took some trial and error, but at the time I crafted a basic morning routine for myself that ensured that I looked both presentable and awake and never looked back until I started working from home. Those of you who have been here since the beginning know that I've struggled to regain the daily momentum that came from having to be at work by 6:45 in the morning every day, and I always suspected that that was because I allowed myself to slip out of my routine and maybe that I became a little lazier. But apparently that's just not the case, at least not fully. According to Landino, I just needed to find my why for getting up and getting ready every single day. This may sound somewhat reductivist, but it seems to really be as simple as that. When I was teaching, I had a couple of whys already: helping children learn and looking and acting like a fully functioning human being before said children even entered my classroom. Bottom line, if you already know why you want to get up at whatever ungodly time you decide to grace the world with your presence, then it becomes a heck of a lot easier to do that. In fact, I'd like to think that I already have the best intentions for those 3 M's, the moving. I sometimes exercise just because I can.
Hey wife, it's gonna be 17 degrees again on the house. Where are you? It's gonna be 17 degrees outside.
I'm exercising. Being mindful, I rarely touch my phone before 9 a.m. most days because I want to enjoy my coffee sans world news or distractions. And mastery. I mean, I read this whole book over the holidays, didn't I? When I started working at home last year, I didn't have the motivation to do these things every morning anymore because I didn't know why it was important to do them every morning yet. And now that I have those couple of specific whys for setting my alarm clock and rolling my bum out of bed every morning, I'm genuinely starting to believe her philosophy on having a strong reason or two for crawling across the floor and slapping your alarm clock, if only because I've been pretty productive over the last week and more likely to stick to the schedule planned out for me than I ever was in recent past, and maybe even when I was teaching. So how did I really feel about Good Morning, Good Life? Well, it's easy to learn something that is really important to you, but whatever that something is, you can just as easily forget it until someone reminds you that you already know what you may have lost. And then you go, okay, I got this. And in fact, I already knew this and I was gonna do it, but honestly, I just needed a simple reminder about it. And that's what reading Good Morning, Good Life was like for me. I also believe that it has enough real-world application that even if you've never really followed any kind of a morning routine at all in the past, that this book would serve as probably a perfectly suitable primer. Whether you have 20 minutes in your morning, or your morning actually starts at 7 p.m. because you work nights, or any of the unique circumstances in between. And even better, if you don't find the answers in this little book, Landino also includes sources as well as a reading list for further study. I already knew how to create a morning routine that works well for me. I just needed quite a few reminders on how to put my best morning foot forward, since the life I've created for myself is so much more personalized than it was before. So if you're trying to fit more or better things into your morning, or you just want to start your day with a bit more control before going off to your day job, I highly recommend this book for its no-nonsense approach to taking control of your days, starting with when you open your eyes, possibly even before the sun if you're like me and you live in a dark, wintry place for half the year. And you can get your own copy of Good Morning, Good Life and the Good Morning, Good Life planner at the links down below. Full disclosure, if you purchase the book through those links, I will receive a small percentage of the purchase at no additional cost to you. But no worries if you don't want to buy that book because you are already way better at mornings than I was. You can also support Old Fashioned AF by joining the Crafty Club. Call me old-fashioned, but becoming an official member may just make you want to start making things, like a hat, which is a project that's already available to any crafter, and it fits within the 3 M's under Mastery. I cannot wait to give you access to more tutorials, vintage lifestyle blog posts, and even more in the coming year. So, now I want to know, what do you do with your mornings? Let me know down below.